Olivia Carter is a Marine, just returning after 6 months of service in the Middle East, standing in a crowded airport, feeling a mix of exhaustion and excitement. Wearing her familiar uniform from her days in combat, Olivia could sense the attention from those around her, curious glances, subtle looks. Not hard to notice, something she had long been used to in daily life, not just because she was a soldier, but also because of the color of her skin. As Olivia checked her boarding pass, she was surprised to find out she had been upgraded to first class. A wave of relief washed over her. Perhaps a small stroke of luck. After the tough months in the field, she moved through security and headed toward the gate. First class for Flight 752 to New York is now boarding. The announcement echoed over the pass system. Boarding the plane, Olivia quickly found her first-class seat. Finally her legs could relax, after long hours waiting at the airport. The spacious, comfortable seat was a stark contrast to the cramped, military flights she was used to. However, her peaceful moment was quickly interrupted by an unpleasant voice. "Excuse me, but are you sure you're in the right seat?" Olivia looked up to see a middle-aged man around 50, dressed sharply in a suit. His expression was not just questioning her seat, but more deeply there was clear suspicion in his eyes. "This is my seat," he said, his tone laced with disdain, as his eyes scanned her uniform and her skin color. "This is first class." His words hung heavy in the air, full of implication. He did not need to say it outright, but the message was clear. A black woman like Olivia did not belong in first class. Olivia calmly looked him in the eye, accustomed to such stares, after years of experiencing this. "Sorry, this is my seat," she replied softly, holding up her boarding pass for him to see. "Seat 3 are right." The man frowned, his lips tightening as he looked at Olivia's ticket. He still seemed unwilling to accept it. He spoke with more arrogance in his voice. "There must be some mistake. You cannot possibly sit here." Olivia sighed, feeling a familiar anger rise within her, but she kept her cool. This was not the first time she had been treated this way, and she knew she had to manage her emotions to resolve the situation. "I'm certain," she replied, her voice steady but patient. "This is my seat and I was assigned to sit here." A flight attendant approached, after noticing the rising tension between Olivia and the man. "Is there a problem here?" she asked with a professional smile, though her eyes had already scanned the situation. The man immediately spoke up, irritation in his voice. "This woman is in the wrong seat. This is first class and I do not think she belongs here." The flight attendant glanced at Olivia, then quickly looked at her ticket. After checking, she smiled and told the man, "Sir, Miss Carter's ticket is valid. She's in the right seat. I'm afraid there's no mistake here." The man's face reddened, his anger clear, but he had no choice but to return to his seat. Reluctantly, as he walked away, Olivia could feel the eyes of others in the first-class cabin. On her, some looked sympathetic, while others were doubtful or distant. Olivia sighed in relief, trying to maintain her composure. Her time in the dangerous battlefields had taught her how to control fear and emotions, but the racism she faced at home sometimes felt even more uncomfortable. Yet this was not new to her, and this time she was ready to face it with strength and patience. The man took his seat, but clearly had not accepted the fact that Olivia, a black woman, could sit in first class. Anger was written all over his face as he glared at her from afar, unable to hide his dissatisfaction. He turned around and spoke louder, making sure other passengers could hear. "I do not understand how someone like you could be sitting here. First class should be for people who truly deserve it." His words were more than just about seating. They carried a deeper, more hurtful message of racism. Someone like you was a phrase Olivia had heard too many times in her life, not just because of her career, but also because of her skin color. She felt the cabin fall quieter as people turned to look, some curious, others uncomfortable with the situation. Olivia took a deep breath, keeping her calm. She had been through much more intense situations on the battlefield, and she knew that anger would not lead to anything good. She turned to face the man and said, her voice calm but firm, "Do not believe first-class seating depends on skin color, or what others think of me. I have a valid first-class ticket, and I've served my country in the military. If you think I do not deserve to sit here, perhaps you should reconsider your perspective." The man grew even more frustrated as he saw Olivia standing her ground. He continued, his voice more provocative. "I'm sure there are others who would feel uncomfortable sitting near you. I paid a lot for this first-class ticket, and I do not intend to let someone like you ruin my flight." His words were sharp like a knife, but Olivia remained composed. She knew his anger stemmed not just from a misunderstanding about the seat, but from deeply ingrained prejudices in society. She could feel the eyes around her continuing to watch. Some people looked away, not wanting to get involved, but a few, especially white passengers, seemed to agree with the man, even whispering to each other. At this point the flight attendant returned, her sharp eyes quickly assessing the increasing tension. "Sir," she said, maintaining her professional tone, but with more firmness, "I've made it clear that Miss Carter is sitting in her rightful seat. If you're not happy with your seat, we can discuss it later, but I must ask that you remain polite and respectful to the other passengers." The man shook his head angrily, saying nothing more, but it was clear he still could not accept Olivia's presence. In first class he turned away, intentionally, showing his contempt through his gestures and attitude. Still, Olivia did not allow herself to be defeated by this hostility. She understood deeply that this was not just a confrontation with a rude man, but a small battle against the prejudices she had faced her entire life. Olivia returned to her seat, trying to enjoy the flight without letting the racism affect her. She remembered her family's encouraging words before she left, and the tough days with her military comrades, where skin color did not determine a person's value. Those experiences made her stronger and reminded her that, no matter what society's prejudices were, she had every right to be proud of herself and what she had accomplished. As the plane began to take off, Olivia closed her eyes, hoping everything would settle down. But deep down, she knew the fight against racism was far from over. Not just for her, but for many others like her. After the plane took off and reached cruising altitude, Olivia sat quietly looking out the window, trying to shake off the frustration and pain caused by the racist remarks the man had made. She was used to these kinds of prejudices, but each time she faced them, it left a mark on her heart. Telling herself she could not let negative emotions take over, Olivia decided not to let this incident ruin her flight. But the more she thought about what had happened, the more she felt the need to do something, not to retaliate or criticize the man, but to try to change his mindset, or at the very least, help him understand her better and what she stood for. Olivia had learned that fighting was not always about using force or direct confrontation. Sometimes the best way to create change was through understanding and dialogue. She reached into her small backpack under the seat and pulled out a notebook and pen. This notebook had been with her through many months in the Middle East, where she recorded her thoughts, memories and feelings during the toughest times. Sitting in the quiet first-class cabin, Olivia began to write, her words flowing onto the blank page. "Dear Sir," Olivia began, carefully considering each word. "My name is Olivia Carter, a soldier in the US military. I've spent many years serving our country and have just returned After 6 months in the Middle East, I know that your words on this flight were not necessarily born out of direct malice toward me, but perhaps from misunderstandings and prejudices deeply rooted in our society. But I want you to know that I am just like you. I have fought, sacrificed, and served to protect the values we both enjoy. Olivia paused, reflecting on the story she wanted to share with this man. She did not want the letter to become a sharp criticism, but instead an invitation for him to better understand the person he had judged solely based on appearances. When I joined the military, she continued, I worked alongside people of all races, religions, and backgrounds. On the battlefield, we did not see each other's skin color. We saw each other's hearts, courage, and sacrifices. I hope that when you look at me today, you do not just see a black woman in uniform, but a person willing to give everything for her country. She recalled memories of her comrades, people who had helped her through challenges and dangers no matter where they came from. People like Ahmed, a translator from the Middle East, who risked his life to help their military unit, or Maria, a Latina soldier, who had saved her life during an unexpected attack. Those memories were etched in her soul, teaching her that unity and trust between people were the most important things. I wanted to share this story with you, Olivia wrote, not to accuse or shame you, but so you can understand more about people like me. People you might not have thought about when they sit next to you on a flight or in everyday life. I believe we can overcome prejudices if we are willing to open our hearts, listen, and try to understand each other better. By the time she finished writing, Olivia felt a sense of relief wash over her. She knew this letter would not immediately change the world or the man's mindset, but it was a small step toward opening up a dialogue so that someone might see the world from a different perspective. As she folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, Olivia noticed the flight attendant standing nearby. Smiling gently, "What are you writing?" the flight attendant asked softly. Olivia hesitated before replying, "I'm writing a letter to the man who questioned my seat earlier. I think that maybe if he understands me better, he might change the way he sees things." The flight attendant looked surprised, but full of respect. "That's a truly kind and wise approach. I'm sure this letter will make an impression on him." Olivia nodded and placed the envelope aside. Feeling lighter for having done the right thing, she had faced racism not with anger or resentment, but with tolerance and a desire to foster understanding. Just as Olivia put the letter away, the plane began to experience turbulence. The seatbelt sign flickered on, and a slight shaking ran through the aircraft. Olivia, used to tense situations from her years on the battlefield, remained unbothered. She sat still, adjusted her seatbelt, and took deep breaths, trying to stay calm. However, not everyone was as composed as she was. The anxious murmurs began to rise in first class. Many passengers became worried, especially an elderly woman sitting across from Olivia. She gripped the armrests tightly, her face pale and filled with fear. Olivia quickly noticed the woman's tension and turned to her, speaking with a calm but warm tone. "It's okay, ma'am. This is just a little turbulence. The plane is still safe. Take deep breaths and stay calm. Everything will be fine." The woman looked at Olivia, her eyes still filled with worry, but after hearing her soothing words, she slowly nodded, trying to follow along. Olivia's gentle yet firm reassurance seemed to help, and the woman began to relax. Seeing the other passengers settle down, Olivia felt a sense of relief. Even though this was not a battlefield, it was still a moment where she could use her calmness and kindness to make a difference. Meanwhile, Olivia could feel someone watching her. She turned her head and met the gaze of the man who had caused the earlier scene. He sat not far away, but now his eyes were different, no longer filled with disdain or judgment. Olivia was familiar with but now there was surprise mixed with curiosity. Perhaps he had witnessed how Olivia had comforted the elderly woman and the other passengers around her. His eyes now held something like respect that he had not shown before. Olivia gave him a small nod, a meaningful gesture. She did not know if this slight change in his gaze meant he had understood something, but just seeing that he no longer looked at her with contempt was a big step forward. In that brief moment, Olivia felt she had broken through a part of the wall the man had built simply by being patient and kind. The plane continued to shake lightly for a few more minutes, but soon stabilized. The passengers around her grew quieter and more comfortable. The elderly woman turned to Olivia, offering a weak but grateful smile. "Thank you, dear. If it were not for you, I think I would have panicked." Olivia smiled back. "It's nothing, ma'am. I'm glad I could help." In the moments that followed, Olivia began to reflect on her earlier confrontation with the man. She did not know if the letter she had written would change his thoughts, but she knew that her actions, not just her words, would have a bigger impact. She had chosen to confront racism not with resentment, but with calmness and tolerance, to show that she deserved her place, not only in first class but as a person with value, far beyond her appearance or society's prejudices. She returned to her notebook, continuing to write the letter. But this time Olivia wrote not just to explain herself, but to share the lessons she had learned from the military about kindness and unity. Regardless of skin color or background, she wanted the man to understand that what he saw on the surface never fully reflected who a person was. While she continued writing, Olivia did not realize that the man had been watching her the whole time. He saw her writing intently, pausing at times as if deep in thought, and he began to wonder about the contents of the letter she had written. His curiosity grew, no longer tinged with anger or scorn, but with a subtle sense of regret. He had begun to realize that perhaps he had misjudged the woman sitting in front of him. When the flight attendant passed by, Olivia called her over and handed her the envelope. "Could you please give this to the man in seat 5C?" she asked gently. The flight attendant smiled, nodded and took the letter away. Olivia watched her leave, not expecting too much, but hoping that her letter would reach the man, at least helping him see a part of her that he had not known before. She sat back in her seat, took a deep breath, and let herself relax for the remainder of the flight. As the plane safely touched down at the airport, passengers began to gather their belongings and prepare to disembark. Olivia, still feeling a bit tired from the long flight, felt relieved to finally be home after months away. She stood up, grabbed her backpack from the overhead compartment, and prepared to leave the plane. As she was about to join the line of people exiting, she heard a soft voice from behind. "Excuse me, Miss Carter." Olivia turned around and met the eyes of the man from earlier, now completely changed. His gaze was no longer arrogant or hostile, but instead he looked uneasy and a little regretful. He stood before Olivia, no longer with the haughty posture he had before, but now with a bit of awkwardness, as if searching for the right words. "Sorry, I do not mean to bother you," he said, his voice much softer than before. "I read your letter." Olivia nodded slightly, not too surprised, but still wondering how he would respond, and she asked, keeping her tone calm, but not pressing him. The man sighed lightly, his eyes flickering for a moment, before looking directly into Olivia's, this time with sincerity she had not seen before. "I have to admit I was wrong. I judged you based on your appearance, and that was not fair." He paused for a moment, perhaps gathering the courage to continue. "I lost my brother in Afghanistan 2 years ago. He was a soldier, and when I saw you, I think my anger and pain overwhelmed me. I reacted in a way I should not have. I'm sorry." Olivia was a little taken aback by this confession. She looked at the man for a moment, seeing the pain and regret in his eyes. It was not just a simple apology. It was an apology from the heart, from a man trying to come to terms with his feelings, and more importantly to make amends. She nodded gently, feeling a sense of empathy rising in her. "I understand your loss," she said sincerely. "Losing a loved one to war is something no one can easily overcome. I'm truly sorry for what your family has gone through." The man looked at Olivia with gratitude, his eyes slightly wet. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "My brother was a good man, and if he was still alive, I think he would never have agreed with the way I acted today." Olivia smiled softly, sensing the honesty in his words. "I believe your brother would be proud of both you and what you just did," she said, her tone warm and encouraging. "Not everyone has the courage to admit they were wrong." The man stood silently for a moment, seemingly moved by Olivia's words. He nodded, his eyes still glistening. "Thank you for your patience and kindness. And thank you for writing that letter." They stood there for a moment, no more words needed. The silence between them was no longer tense, but rather a quiet reconciliation. Sometimes words were not necessary, just a mutual understanding between two people who had once been strangers. Before they parted ways, the man extended his hand, this time with a completely different gesture. "My name is Richard," he introduced, his tone gentle and sincere. "It's an honor to meet you, Olivia." Olivia shook his hand, feeling peace in her heart. "Thank you, Richard," she replied, a smile spreading across her face. "We all have something to learn from each other." As they both walked off the plane, Olivia felt much lighter than when she had boarded. Her encounter with Richard, which began as a tense moment of racism, had turned into an opportunity for understanding and healing. She had not only learned how to face discrimination, but had realized that sometimes kindness and understanding could create real change. Entering the bustling airport, Olivia felt the vibrant yet warm atmosphere of people waiting for loved ones to return. She quickly spotted her family. Her mother, father and younger sister standing a bit away, holding a small sign that read, "Welcome home, Olivia." Her heart filled with joy as she saw their familiar, beaming faces. She hurried over to them, and within seconds, she was wrapped in the tight embrace of her family. Her mother burst into tears, unable to hold back her emotions upon seeing her daughter home safely. "You're back safe, my love," she whispered through her sobs. Her father, standing behind, looked at her with pride and love. "Welcome home, Olivia," he said in his deep, warm voice filled with respect for her. Olivia hugged her family tightly, feeling all the tension and worries of the past few days melt away. Although the battlefield had been dangerous, and she had faced prejudice on the flight, this moment, being home in her family's arms, was one of the things she cherished most. After collecting her luggage, the family drove Olivia home. Along the way, her mother kept asking, "How was your flight? Were you tired? Was everything all right?" Olivia hesitated for a moment, recalling the tense moments with Richard on the plane. Actually, she began. Something happened. It was not entirely smooth. The whole family turned to her with curiosity and concern. "What happened?" her father asked. Olivia took a deep breath and began to recount the entire story, from when the man had doubted her and treated her with prejudice because of her skin color and uniform, to when she decided to write him a letter instead of confronting him with anger. She also shared about their conversation after the flight when Richard apologized. Her mother sat quietly, holding Olivia's hands tightly, her eyes filled with empathy. You handled everything with incredible calm and maturity, she said softly, her voice full of pride. I do not know if I could have done the same in that situation. Her father nodded in agreement. You made a very wise choice, he said. Not everyone has the strength to face racism and prejudice like that and still remain calm and forgiving. You've made me very prouder. Olivia's younger sister Lana, who had always looked up to her, sat silently listening to the story. Without saying a word, she turned to Olivia, her eyes filled with admiration, as if looking at a true hero. You always do the right thing, Olivia. You're not just a soldier. You're changing the world. Lana whispered. Olivia smiled, gently patting her sister's hand. I'm just doing what I think is right, but thank you for always believing in me. Throughout the ride home, Olivia felt the love and unconditional support from her family. It only strengthened her belief in what she had done, that even when faced with prejudice or racism, she would always choose the path of understanding and healing instead of conflict. When they arrived home, everything was full of welcome. The Carter family's small house was decorated with balloons, and Olivia's favorite dishes were waiting on the dining table. The familiar smell of the food immediately reminded her of the happy days spent with her family before she enlisted. During dinner, everyone could not stop asking Olivia about her time in the Middle East, about her experiences, and the stories she had lived through. She shared beautiful memories, the comrades who had become her second family, and the challenges they had faced together. But the story of her flight with Richard remained the most significant impression. Everyone has prejudices to some extent, Olivia said as she concluded the story, but I believe that, through conversation and understanding, we can break down those barriers. Richard is a perfect example. Just by opening up, he was able to change his mindset. Her entire family nodded in agreement, feeling proud of the way Olivia had handled the racist situation with calmness and wisdom. Her father placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder, his deep voice full of faith. You did the right thing, Olivia, and you delivered an important message that understanding and kindness can overcome all prejudices. Olivia smiled, feeling as though all her exhaustion and stress had completely disappeared. She was home in her family's arms, with a strong belief that she was not just a soldier fighting on the battlefield, but also someone contributing to peace in society. That night, as Olivia lay in her room, she reflected on everything that had happened, from the discrimination she had faced to writing the letter and her conversation with Richard. Although not everything had gone perfectly, she knew that she had chosen the right path, the path of tolerance and understanding. She drifted off to sleep, feeling more at peace than ever, knowing that her journey was far from over, but with the support of her family and her belief in the value she was upholding, Olivia Carter would continue to move forward, always making a difference in this world. The next morning, as Olivia woke up, the warm sunlight streamed through her window, making her feel peaceful and refreshed. Though she was back home, her mind still wondered about the future. After months of service in the Middle East, she now faced a big question. Should she continue her military career or start a new chapter in her life? As she sat down for breakfast, her father suddenly asked, "Have you thought about the future, Olivia? Are you planning to re-enlist, or do you have something else in mind?" Her father's question was something Olivia had asked herself many times since returning home. The truth was, after everything she had been through, not just on the battlefield, but also on the flight with Richard, Olivia felt that she had more to contribute to society. Beyond the military, her mother looked up from breakfast, her eyes full of concern but also love. "Your father's right, dear. We'll support whatever decision you make, but I know this is not an easy choice." Olivia took a deep breath, then shared the thoughts running through her mind. I still love the military, love my comrades and the sense of serving the country. She began, her voice steady but full of reflection. But after everything I've experienced, I feel like I can do more outside the battlefield. My encounter with Richard on the flight made me realize that so many people out there are still trapped in prejudice and racism, and they need help seeing a different perspective to understand each other better. Her father nodded, smiling gently as if he had already anticipated this. My daughter has always thought beyond herself, always thinking of others. I'm proud of that. Olivia continued, I think I can use my experiences and knowledge to help veterans, help them reintegrate into civilian life. And I also want to work with communities to break down prejudices, to help create a world where people can understand and respect each other more. Olivia's younger sister Lana, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly spoke up. You can do that, Olivia. I know you can. You've inspired so many people, and I believe you'll succeed, no matter what path you choose. Olivia smiled warmly at Lana. She had always known she had her family's support, but hearing those words from her younger sister made her feel stronger. She had learned so much from facing social prejudices and racism. Now she felt it was her responsibility to share those lessons with others. Her father continued, you do not have to decide right now, but I think there's an opportunity you might want to consider. He paused for a moment before adding, Mer Johnson, our neighbor, runs a veteran support organization. He's asked about you and expressed interest in inviting you to join their team. Olivia was surprised, not expecting an opportunity to present itself, just as she was thinking about her future. What does he want me to do? She asked. Her father replied, he wants you to help coordinate programs that support veterans, from counseling to helping them find jobs and reintegrate into the community. Mer Johnson said that with your experience, you could do a lot of good for those struggling after returning from the battlefield. Olivia sat silently for a moment, thinking about the offer. It felt like it was part of the picture she had been searching for, a way to continue serving, but in a different way, where she could help both the community and her fellow soldiers. What do you think, Mom? Olivia turned to her mother, seeking advice from the woman she had always trusted. Her mother smiled gently. You've grown so much, Olivia. I believe that whatever you do, you will make a difference. If this is the path you feel is right, then follow it. Olivia felt a warmth and motivation spread through her. The decision was not easy, but she knew that with her family's support, she could step forward onto this new path. She would not abandon the values the military had taught her: courage, compassion, and a determination to stand up for what was right. But now, she would broaden her vision to serve the community, to help those who needed understanding and support. She turned to her father. I think I'll meet with Mer Johnson. I want to see how I can help veterans and my community. Her father nodded, his eyes gleaming with pride. That's a great decision, Olivia, and I know you'll do something amazing. As breakfast ended, Olivia felt as if a new chapter of her life had just opened. She knew that everything she had been through, from battles on the field to confronting racism, had shaped her into a stronger, more patient person, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Even though the future was still full of uncertainty, Olivia was ready. She would keep fighting, not just on the battlefield, but within society, where she would build bridges of understanding and tolerance, always striving to make the world a better place for everyone. A few days later, Olivia met with Mer Johnson at his small office, located right in the neighborhood where she had grown up. The office was not grand, but it had a cozy, heartfelt atmosphere. Photos of veterans the organization had helped line the walls, accompanied by sincere words of gratitude. Meet Johnson, an older man with a tough exterior but caring eyes, smiled as Olivia walked in. "Hello, Olivia. Thank you for coming," he said, standing up from his desk and extending his hand. "Your father said you were thinking about your future, and if you're looking for a way to keep serving the community, we could really use someone like you here." Olivia shook his hand, feeling the sincerity in his voice. "I'm grateful for this opportunity, Mr. Johnson. I've been thinking a lot about how I can use my experience, not just from the military, but to help veterans and the community as well." Mr. Johnson nodded, his eyes shining with hope. "We need people with hearts and dedication like yours. It's not just about helping veterans reintegrate into society, but also building bridges between them and the community. Many soldiers come back, not only dealing with emotional trauma, but also struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. People like you, with your battlefield experience and compassion, can make a huge difference." Olivia sat down and listened as Mr. Johnson explained the organization's work. They did not just provide psychological counseling, but also helped veterans find jobs, resolve housing issues, and organized experience sharing sessions between veterans. They also held educational programs for the community, helping people better understand the challenges veterans face when they return from war. The more Olivia listened, the more she felt this was the path she had been searching for. "Mr. Johnson, I'd really love to get involved," Olivia said. "I believe that with my experiences, I can help veterans regain their confidence and trust in themselves. And I also want to help the community understand and support them better." Mr. Johnson smiled in satisfaction. "Wonderful, that's exactly what we need. You could start by organizing a discussion for local veterans next week. This is an annual event we've been holding for years. This year, if you're willing, you could share your experiences from the Middle East and what you've learned from your recent encounter on the plane. I'm sure your story would be a big inspiration to many." Olivia felt a mix of excitement and anticipation rise within her. "I'd be honored to share my story," she replied with confidence. Over the next few days, Olivia spent time preparing for the discussion. She did not just want to share her experiences from the battlefield. She also wanted to talk about the understanding and tolerance she had realized after her encounter with Richard on the plane. As she prepared, she felt that every detail of her story, from the tough days in the Middle East to facing racism, could help people see life from a different, more open and compassionate perspective. On the day of the event, Olivia entered the small hall where the discussion would take place. More than 50 people attended, including veterans, their families, and community members. A few familiar faces from the neighborhood where she grew up appeared, but perhaps the most surprising attendee was Richard, the man she had met on the plane. He sat at the back of the room, his eyes full of interest. The discussion began with stories from other veterans who shared the difficulties they faced after returning from the battlefield, from dealing with painful memories to feeling isolated in their own communities. Olivia listened, feeling the pain but also the strength in their words. When it was her turn, Olivia stepped forward, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on her. She took a deep breath and began to tell her story, from her early days in the military to the memories of her comrades in the Middle East, and then her encounter with Richard on the plane, how she had faced racism not with anger, but with tolerance and understanding. "There are times when we encounter deep-seated prejudices from others," Olivia said, her voice full of emotion. "But the important thing is not to react to that hatred with more hate. but to give them a chance to understand us. I chose to write Richard a letter, not to criticize but to explain, to create a connection, and from that connection, we were able to understand each other better. The room was silent, hanging on to every word Olivia spoke. She could see the eyes of veterans and their family members filled with empathy. Richard, sitting at the back of the room now, looked at her with deep respect. As she finished, Olivia said, "I do not know if we can change everyone immediately, but I believe that with kindness and patience, we can build bridges between people, no matter their skin color, religion, or background." Applause filled the room as Olivia finished. People approached her to thank her and share their feelings. Richard walked over to her, smiling gently. "Thank you, Olivia. You've changed me, and I believe with your story, you'll change many more people." Olivia felt a deep sense of joy within her. She knew her journey was still long, but today she had taken another important step. She had started to build bridges between veterans and the community, between people with different stories and prejudices, and she was ready to continue this mission. Even though she no longer wore her military uniform, Olivia continued to serve by helping soldiers return home and creating understanding in the community. She knew she was on the right path and would continue striving to make the world a better place day by day. After the discussion, Olivia felt a sense of relief, and joy spread through her heart. She had shared her story not just as a soldier, but as someone who knew how to face challenges, both on the battlefield, in everyday life, and even against social prejudices. She had not just spoken about courage on the battlefield, but had emphasized the power of tolerance and understanding between people. As she stepped out of the hall, Richard approached her once more. His eyes gleamed with respect that Olivia had never seen before. "Olivia, you've truly changed my life. You've taught me that we can always overcome barriers if we open our hearts and listen. I will never forget that." Olivia smiled warmly and nodded. "Thank you, Richard. We can all learn and change if we're willing to give." Understanding. With emotions welling up in her heart, Olivia knew that she had not only helped Richard, but had made a significant impact on everyone who attended the discussion. Every step she had taken since returning home reaffirmed that creating bridges between people was not just her responsibility, but her mission. In the weeks that followed, Olivia became more involved in the work at Ma Johnson's organization. She organized discussions, met with veterans and their families, listened to their deeply emotional stories, and supported them their journey of reintegrating into the community. She also expanded her work to schools and communities, sharing with students and residents the lessons she had learned from the military about unity, patience, and compassion. Whenever she stood before a crowd, Olivia was not just a veteran sharing her story. She became an inspiration, a pioneer in breaking down social barriers. She knew that if one small story could change one person's mindset, then hundreds of stories could change an entire community. One day, while sitting on the porch with her mother, looking out at the wide yard, Olivia suddenly realized that her journey was still long, but this time she was not alone. She had her family, her comrades, the veterans, and people like Richard, people who had undergone a great transformation through understanding and tolerance. She knew that with each passing day, every small action she took would continue to build a world where understanding replaced fear and compassion overcame prejudice. Olivia's journey was not just about a soldier returning from the battlefield. It was the journey of someone determined to build bridges, to overcome barriers, and to create a better world for everyone. And Olivia knew she was on the right path, ready to face any challenges that lay ahead. The story of Olivia Carter is a journey of overcoming prejudice and racism, After returning from the battlefield, instead of confronting it with anger, Olivia chose understanding and tolerance, helping change the mindset of those around her. The message of the story is that, with patience and kindness, we can overcome all barriers and build a more united world. If you found this story inspiring,